At 05:45 hours on July 10th, 1943, outside Catania, Sicily, the ground trembled. German Panzer IVs from the Hermann Göring Division advanced through pre-dawn darkness. Intelligence reports had predicted British paratroopers would scatter before armoured assault. Instead, Sergeant William Dalton of the 1st Parachute Battalion crouched behind rubble, gripping a PIAT launcher. The Projector, Infantry, anti-tank, 32 pounds of spring-loaded desperation, had proven unreliable in testing. War Office records listed a 40% misfire rate during trials, but at 06:12 hours, Dalton's first round struck a Panzer's turret ring. The explosion silenced German radio chatter for 11 seconds. After-action reports would note, PIAT effective against frontal armour at ranges previously deemed insufficient. What changed wasn't the weapon, it was everything else. Dawn arrived slowly over Catania on July 10th, filtering through smoke from burning olive groves. Sergeant Dalton had been awake for 19 hours, part of the 1st Parachute Battalion's defensive perimeter. Their orders were simple: hold the road junction until armoured reinforcements arrived. No one mentioned when reinforcements might come. The PIAT beside him was weapon number 347B, manufactured in March at a Midlands factory. Its spring mechanism required 90 pounds of force to cock. In training, Dalton managed it twice before his shoulders cramped. Now, with German engines rumbling closer, he tested the cocking lever again. It engaged smoothly. Small mercies. Corporal Harris crouched 3 meters away, checking ammunition counts. Their section held 1 PIAT, 14 rounds, and 8 rifles. Against armour, the mathematics were unforgiving. Dalton wiped condensation from the weapon's sight. The metal was cool, despite summer heat. He could smell diesel fuel mixing with dust and the sharp tang of cordite from earlier shelling. Records later showed the Hermann Göring Division deployed 47 tanks that morning. The British paratroopers numbered 132 men. Someone at headquarters had calculated those odds and sent them anyway. Harris moved closer, his boots scraping stone. "Ever fired one of those for real?" His voice carried the flat tone men use when they already know the answer. Dalton shook his head. Training had involved shooting at stationary targets from prepared positions. This was different. The PIAT's reputation preceded it: temperamental, heavy, prone to jamming. But intelligence reports confirmed German tanks were vulnerable at close range if hit precisely. The trick was surviving long enough to get that close. At 06 hours, a radio message crackled through. "Enemy armour approaching from northwest. Engage at commander's discretion." Commander's discretion meant desperation. Dalton positioned himself behind a collapsed wall, calculating angles. The PIAT required firing from a stable base. Too much movement and the spring mechanism could fail. He braced the weapon against rubble, feeling vibrations through stone as tanks drew nearer. In the gathering light, he could see other soldiers checking weapons, adjusting positions. No one spoke. The sound of approaching Panzers eliminated the need for words. Factory records indicated each PIAT cost £17 to manufacture. Against a 60-ton tank, it seemed an unfair exchange. But unfairness had stopped mattering weeks ago. The 1st Panzer IV emerged from smoke at 6:08 hours, its dark hull silhouetted against burning buildings. Dalton felt his heartbeat accelerate, each pulse distinct. The tank commander's hatch was open. Overconfidence or necessity, it didn't matter. He adjusted the PIAT's angle, compensating for the 17-degree slope. Training manuals recommended firing at 50 meters. The Panzer was closing at 43 meters. Close enough. His hands steadied as muscle memory overrode fear. The weapon's stock pressed against his shoulder. He could see Harris in peripheral vision, absolutely still. The Panzer's turret began rotating toward their position. Time compressed. Dalton exhaled slowly, finger finding the trigger. The PIAT's spring released with a violent lurch, nearly dislocating his shoulder. The shaped charge projectile covered 43 meters in 0.8 seconds. Impact occurred at the turret ring, where armor was thinnest. The explosion was immediate and catastrophic. Flame jetted upward as ammunition cooked off inside. The tank lurched sideways, tracks grinding to a halt. Dalton didn't watch. He was already reloading, hands moving automatically, despite trembling. Records later showed that first shot at 06:12 hours disrupted the German advance for 7 minutes. 7 minutes bought with one successful trigger pull and 19 hours without sleep. The Germans adapted faster than expected. By 06:30 hours, 3 more Panzers advanced in dispersed formation. They had learned from the first kill. Tank commanders buttoned up, eliminating vulnerable hatches. Spacing increased to prevent multiple hits from one position. Dalton watched through a gap in rubble, calculating new angles. The PIAT's maximum effective range was 100 meters on paper. In practice, accuracy degraded past 60. He needed them closer. Harris pointed toward movement on the left flank. Infantry accompanying armor. Standard doctrine. Use foot soldiers to suppress anti-tank positions while tanks maneuver. It was working. Rifle fire forced the British paratroopers down while Panzers repositioned. Dalton felt the tactical shift immediately. At 06:47 hours, he fired at a Panzer moving perpendicular to his position. The round missed by 2 meters, detonating against a stone wall. The explosion showered him with debris. His ears rang. No time for assessment. He reloaded while Harris provided covering fire. The second Panzer was closing, its machine gun stitching bullets across their position. Dalton shifted left, finding new cover. The PIAT felt heavier with each movement. At 06:52, he fired again. This time the projectile struck the Panzer's track assembly. The track separated with a metallic shriek, immobilizing the vehicle. Not destroyed, but neutralized. In after-action reports, that distinction mattered less than it did in the moment. By 07:15 hours, ammunition became the primary concern. Dalton's section had expended 8 PIAT rounds. 6 remained. Each shot represented a calculated risk: miss and waste irreplaceable ordnance, or hold fire and let armor advance unopposed. The mathematics of desperation. German tactics evolved throughout the morning. They began using smoke shells to obscure approaches. Effective, but it slowed their advance. Battalion headquarters radioed at 07:23. Reinforcements delayed. Hold current positions. Delayed meant hours, possibly longer. Dalton acknowledged and kept firing. A third Panzer appeared through smoke at 07:31, moving cautiously. Its commander had learned from predecessors. The tank advanced in short rushes, pausing behind cover, professional and dangerous. Dalton waited, tracking its movement. Patience was a luxury measured in seconds. When the Panzer paused to orient, he fired. The round impacted below the turret, penetrating the engine compartment. Smoke poured from ventilation grills. The crew evacuated rapidly, disappearing into ruins. That made 3 tanks neutralized or destroyed. German radios transmitted urgent orders. Dalton could hear the tone, if not the words. The advance had stalled. At 07:45, a different sound reached him. British artillery, finally ranging in from positions to the south. Shells began falling among German formations. The coordination hadn't been planned, but it was effective. For the first time since dawn, Dalton allowed himself to think they might survive this. The thought lasted approximately 12 seconds before the next wave arrived. Between engagements, Dalton examined the PIAT mechanism more closely. The spring-loaded firing system was ingenious, but problematic. Cocking required immense effort, and the spring occasionally failed to engage properly. During a lull at 8 hours, he experimented with the cocking lever. By adjusting his grip and using a fulcrum point on nearby rubble, he reduced the effort required by approximately 30%. Not a proper modification, just a field expedient born from exhaustion, Harris noticed. That works? Dalton nodded, demonstrating. Other soldiers observed and adapted the technique. Small innovations compound under pressure. By 0820 their firing rate had improved marginally. Marginal advantages kept people alive. The next German assault came at 0834 with renewed intensity. 4 Panzers advanced in coordinated fashion, supported by half-tracks carrying infantry. The tactical sophistication suggested a new commander had taken control. Dalton engaged the lead tank at 68 meters, hit. The Panzer slewed sideways, blocking the road. The following tanks adjusted course, moving into fields where terrain was less favorable. Tracks churned through soft earth, reducing speed. British rifles concentrated on the half-tracks, forcing infantry to dismount prematurely. The battle fragmented into individual engagements, exactly what defenders needed. At 0847, Dalton fired his 11th round. 2 remained. The 12th round misfired at 0853. The PIAT spring mechanism failed to fully release. Leaving the projectile lodged halfway, Dalton cleared the malfunction with hands that had forgotten what it felt like not to shake. The round extracted cleanly. He reloaded the same projectile and fired successfully 10 seconds later. 1 round remaining. The German assault reached its peak at 09 hours. 6 Panzers were still operational, but their advance had slowed to a crawl. British positions were collapsing on the flanks, but the road junction remained contested. Dalton's section had become a focal point through necessity rather than design. The Germans needed to clear this position to advance. At 0912, a Panzer approached within 30 meters. Too close for comfort, perfect for lethality. Dalton aimed carefully, accounting for the acute angle. His final PIAT round struck the tank's side armor where plates joined. The shaped charge penetrated, and the Panzer's internal ammunition storage detonated. The explosion was larger than any previous hit. Debris rained across the position. When the smoke cleared, the tank was a burning wreck. Dalton dropped the empty PIAT. 14 rounds expended. Records showed his section had destroyed or immobilized 7 tanks and damaged 3 others. Against a full armoured assault, it should have been insufficient, but combined with artillery support and German caution, it was enough. At 0930, the assault broke off. German forces withdrew to regroup, their momentum shattered. The road junction remained in British hands. Harris slumped against rubble, breathing hard. "We're out of ammunition." Dalton nodded. If the Germans returned, they'd face rifles against armor, but for now, the immediate threat had passed. Across the battlefield, smoke rose from destroyed vehicles. The cost was visible in twisted metal and scattered equipment. In London, analysts would eventually calculate that PIAT launchers had destroyed more German armor in Sicily than any other infantry weapon. On July 10th in Catania, Dalton knew only that they had survived. The pause in fighting lasted 47 minutes. During that time, ammunition resupply reached the position via jeep. The driver, a corporal from logistics, delivered 12 PIAT rounds and additional rifle ammunition. "You lot are famous," he said, unloading crates. "Battalions talking about the roadblock at Catania." Famous felt wrong when surrounded by destruction. Dalton accepted the ammunition without comment and began checking each round for damage. Quality control mattered more than reputation. By 10:17 hours, the position was resupplied and reinforced. A section from the 2nd Battalion arrived, bringing 2 additional PIAT launchers. The defensive perimeter strengthened considerably. German forces probed the line at 10:43 but withdrew after brief contact. Their earlier losses had imposed caution. Afternoon brought different challenges. Temperature climbed past 35 degrees Celsius. Heat shimmered off stone, making observation difficult. Water became as critical as ammunition. Dalton's section rotated through rest periods, though rest meant lying in shade while remaining alert. At 14:20, German artillery began ranging in. Shells fell with methodical precision, searching for defensive positions. The British had no counter-battery fire available. They endured the barrage and waited. Dalton used the time to service the PIAT, cleaning dust from the mechanism. The weapon had performed beyond expectations, but reliability was never guaranteed. At 15:05, the shelling stopped. An ominous silence followed. Through binoculars, observers reported German infantry massing for another assault. This time without armor support, a tactical shift that suggested respect for the PIAT's effectiveness. When the assault came at 15:23, it was fierce but ultimately unsuccessful. Rifle fire and coordinated defense repelled the attack within 18 minutes. The Germans withdrew again, leaving casualties scattered across open ground. By evening on July 10th, the tactical situation had stabilized. German forces maintained pressure, but showed no appetite for frontal assault. Their earlier losses had recalibrated expectations. British reinforcements arrived at 18:30s. Tanks from the 44th Royal Tank Regiment finally breaking through from beachheads. The immediate crisis passed. Dalton watched Sherman tanks roll past, their weight and firepower rendering the PIAT suddenly obsolete. It was a strange feeling, relief mixed with the knowledge that morning's desperation had been necessary precisely because these tanks hadn't arrived sooner. Battalion assembled at 19:1 for briefing. Major Thompson, the commanding officer, addressed them with characteristic bluntness. "You held when you shouldn't have. Intelligence estimated we'd lose the position by 08 hours. You lasted until support arrived." He paused, surveying exhausted faces. Preliminary counts show 12 enemy tanks destroyed or disabled in this sector, 7 attributed to PIAT fire. The numbers felt abstract. Dalton remembered each shot individually. The recoil, the weight, the impact. 12 tanks translated to specific moments of fear and calculation. Thompson continued, "The Germans are withdrawing to defensive positions inland. We advance tomorrow." No one cheered. Advancing meant more fighting, different terrain, continued danger, but it also meant the landing had succeeded. Sicily would be taken. At 20:15, Dalton found space to rest in a partially intact building. He cleaned his weapon methodically, removing dust and carbon scoring. The PIAT had fired 14 times without catastrophic failure. Factory specifications promised reliability under ideal conditions. Combat was never ideal, yet the weapon had functioned when needed most. Records later showed that Sicily campaign validated the PIAT's design despite its awkwardness. Against expectations, it had worked. Sometimes that was enough. The following days brought steady advance and sporadic resistance. German forces retreated in good order, contesting key positions but avoiding encirclement. By July 13th, Dalton's section had moved 18 kilometers inland. The PIAT accompanied them, along with growing respect for its capabilities. On July 14th at 06:30 hours, they encountered dug-in positions near Gerbini. 2 Panzer IVs supported German infantry in prepared defences. Dalton's section deployed PIATs from covered positions. The engagement lasted 40 minutes, 1 tank destroyed, 1 disabled. German infantry withdrew. Efficiency came from experience. Each crew had learned positioning, timing, and target selection. What required 19 hours of stress at Catania now took less than an hour with proper preparation. By July 17th, organised resistance in the British sector had largely collapsed. German forces were conducting fighting withdrawal toward Messina. The campaign's outcome became increasingly certain. On July 20th, battalion received orders to halt and consolidate positions. The advance had outpaced supply lines. During the operational pause, maintenance crews inspected weapons thoroughly. The PIAT launchers showed significant wear. Springs had lost tension. Firing mechanisms required replacement parts, but they remained functional. An ordnance officer interviewed Dalton about his experience with the weapon. Initial reports suggested 40% failure rate, the officer noted. Field data shows substantially better performance. Any observations? Dalton considered. It works if you maintain it and understand the limitations. Close range, stable position, proper angle. Follow those rules, and it's reliable enough. The officer recorded notes carefully. Your section achieved highest success rate in the battalion. Command wants to know why. Why felt complicated? Training, necessity, luck, all factored in. Dalton settled on simpler truth. We couldn't afford to miss. The interview concluded. Later analysis confirmed field modifications and techniques developed during combat significantly improved PIAT effectiveness. Sicily fell on August 17, 1943, after 38 days of fighting. The campaign cost approximately 24,000 Allied casualties against 165,000 Axis losses. Strategic objectives achieved. Italy invaded, Mediterranean secured, German forces diverted from Eastern Front. For participants, numbers measured different things. Dalton's section suffered 2 killed, 5 wounded during the Sicily campaign. The PIAT had become standard equipment, its reputation transformed from skepticism to cautious approval. After-action reports documented 347 confirmed armour kills by PIAT across all units. The weapon's effectiveness surprised analysts who had predicted minimal impact. Manufacturing increased accordingly. By September 1943, production had doubled. On August 20th, 3 days after Sicily's fall, Dalton sat in a field canteen writing letters. One to Corporal Harris's family. Harris had been wounded on July 28th and evacuated to hospital. The letter felt inadequate. How to explain that someone's son or brother had helped stop German tanks with a weapon most people had never heard of? He kept it simple. Your son served with distinction and courage. His actions helped secure victory. Truth, if incomplete. Another letter went to the War Office, technical in nature. Dalton detailed the field modifications he'd developed for the PIAT, the fulcrum technique for cocking, optimal firing positions, maintenance procedures under combat conditions. The letter acknowledged similar innovations by other soldiers. Combat generated knowledge that training couldn't replicate. Weeks later, a training bulletin incorporated several of his suggestions. Small recognition for small innovations that saved lives. By October, Dalton's unit was preparing for the next campaign. Italy proper, where German defences would be stronger and terrain more challenging. The PIAT would accompany them. Its limitations were understood now, as were its capabilities. Soldiers had learned to trust the weapon because they had no choice, and the weapon had proven trustworthy enough. Sometimes that mutual adaptation was what victory required. The legacy of Sicily's PIAT employment extended far beyond the campaign itself. Training programs revised their curricula based on field data. New soldiers learned techniques developed under fire by men like Dalton. The weapon's tactical doctrine evolved from desperate expedient to integrated anti-armor system. By 1944, PIAT launchers were standard equipment in infantry battalions across British and Commonwealth forces. They served in Italy, Northwest Europe, and Burma. Production reached 115,000 units by war's end. Design improvements addressed early reliability concerns, stronger springs, refined firing mechanisms, better sights. Each modification traced back to field reports and combat experience. Sicily provided the proving ground. Casualties were carefully documented. The 1st Parachute Battalion suffered 37% losses during the Sicily campaign. Dalton survived, as did most of his section. Statistical analysis later showed units equipped with PIATs experienced lower casualty rates when engaging armor compared to units without anti-tank capability. The mathematics were clear. Organic anti-armor weapons saved infantry lives. German after-action reports reflected changed perception. Early documents from Sicily showed confident expectation that British infantry would retreat before armoured assault. Later reports noted, enemy demonstrated unexpected anti-tank capability at squad level. Advances must account for infantry portable weapons effective against medium armour. Tactical adjustments followed. German armour doctrine evolved to respect threats previously dismissed. On November 3, 1943, Dalton received the Military Medal for actions at Catania. The citation noted, for exceptional courage and initiative in engaging enemy armour with anti-tank weapons, contributing directly to successful defence of critical positions. He accepted the medal during a brief ceremony, then returned to training. Awards measured recognition, but the real validation came from soldiers who had been there. They knew what the PIAT meant. Not perfection, but possibility. A chance to fight back when fighting back seemed impossible. The final assessment came from an unlikely source. In 1947, a German tank commander named Hauptmann Ernst Weber published memoirs of his Sicily experience. Weber had commanded armour in the Hermann Göring Division during the July 10th assault near Catania. His account was clinical and respectful. We expected infantry to scatter before our advance. Instead, we encountered coordinated anti-tank fire from positions we had not identified. The British used a weapon unfamiliar to us, spring-loaded, apparently man-portable. 3 of my company's tanks were destroyed in the first hour. We withdrew to reassess. The psychological impact exceeded the material losses. Infantry that can destroy armour changes tactical calculus fundamentally. Weber's observation captured the essential transformation. The PIAT hadn't revolutionized warfare through technological superiority. Its spring mechanism was inferior to German Panzerfaust or American bazooka designs. What changed was infantrymen's capability to engage armour without specialised support. That capability, once proven in Sicily, spread throughout Allied forces. Training, production, and doctrine all adapted to incorporate the lesson. By war's end, the PIAT had become unremarkable, standard equipment that soldiers expected to have available. That normalization represented the weapon's true success. Dalton returned to civilian life in 1946, resuming work as a machinist in Coventry. He seldom spoke of the war. When he did, people were often surprised to learn about the PIAT. Most remembered Spitfires, Lancaster bombers, and Sherman tanks. Few knew about the awkward 32-pound spring launcher that had helped stop German armour in Sicily. But soldiers knew, and in training depots across Britain, instructors teaching the next generation would begin PIAT instruction with the same phrase. This weapon works if you trust it and understand it. Men proved that in Sicily. The file on PIAT employment during the Sicily campaign was closed in 1948, archived with thousands of other technical reports. The numbers had already rewritten doctrine. The human cost remained in memory alone.